luck. I just want to ask if you have any questions during the course of the class, go ahead and pop them in the chat. I will either answer them directly there or pass them on to Darren. And I'll also be putting the handout in there as well in case you didn't receive that already. And now, Darren, take it away.
All right, so this is a really easy way to make socks. So once you can master this, you can then convert the formulas I'm going to give you into making socks with any size yarn. So you can use sock weight yarn, worsted weight, anything you want. So maybe let's go ahead and change the view to the overhead view. Okay, so the yarn I'm using today for this class is the Hometown Bonus Bundle, which is by Lion Brand, and it's available on michaels.com or on lionbrand.com. It's a really nice, soft, fluffy yarn to work with. Makes a nice sock. It's more like a house slipper when you use yarn that big. You probably wouldn't really put it into a shoe or a boot, but it's great for practice. The first thing that I want to review is, because we're not going to be using a pattern, we're going to be measuring your foot. So we've all seen a human foot, right? We know what a foot is shaped like, and that's our pattern. And because all feet are shaped differently, of course, then we need to take measurements so that we get a proper fit. That's a really beautiful thing about handmade socks. If you get a really good fit, then it's a really, really nice pair of socks for you. I have a lot of measurements listed here, but really the measurements that we need for most socks are just number 3, which is around the ball of the foot, and then number 5, which is the length of your entire foot, and number 4, which is the length of your toe to where your leg meets, to where your foot joins to your leg. That's where the gusset will start. And then maybe number 1 so that you make the ribbing. But usually by the time you get back to that point, it's usually pretty close. Somehow the ball of our foot right here and our ankle tend to be similar in measurements. Most sock classes I've had, that seems to be the case. So you do want to measure this, measure your foot carefully. And then we're going to try to do a gauge swatch, and we're going to match our gauge to these measurements. So that will be the next step after you do the measuring. Okay, so any questions about the measuring? It's pretty straightforward. And of course, you can use all the measurements as you want, if you want to. And if you have somebody that has really unusually shaped feet or hard to fit feet, then you might need to use more measurements to get a nice fit for them if you're using them in that way. If you're knitting socks for yourself, the best thing about making socks from the toe up is you can try the socks on as you go after you finish each step to make sure that it fits right and that it looks right. And if it doesn't, you can just take out the previous step and try, give it another try. All right, so the next thing you want to do, the next step will be to knit a gauge swatch. So you're going to take the yarn that you're going to knit with, and you're going to use the needles that you're going to knit with, and you're going to knit, cast on about 40 stitches so that it's big enough to measure, and you're going to knit until like it's 3 or 4 inches, just so it's big enough to measure. It doesn't have to be very big. Now for this one, I knitted this one flat just because I was using it for demonstration purposes. But if you're making a sock, you do want to knit your swatch in the round as well as you're going to be knitting the sock in the round. And so I would use the exact same needles, the double pointed needles that you're going to knit your sock with, use those for your swatch to get an accurate measurement. So now we're going to measure our stitches. And it's nice to have a hard ruler when you're doing this. You don't want a soft tape measure because they can kind of curl or move around. You get a nice, more accurate measure if you use a hard ruler. And so what we want to look for when we count our gauge, let's see if I can bring this up a little closer, is we're looking at these V-shaped stitches, and that is our knit stitch. So like this right here. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how we count them. And so I'm going to lay it back down so I can get a nice count. and we want to see how many are in 4 inches. So you want to line your number 1 up right at the beginning of that stitch. Right there. Make sure you get it lined up nicely. And we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And mine's really, it really ends right on the 10th one. So it gives it nice. Sometimes it'll be a half a one and you can kind of round up or round down a little bit. We don't have to have an exact fit for this small sock, but the more precise measurement you can get, the better. And you can also do a 2-inch measure or a 3-inch measure, but the bigger the measurement is, the more accurate you're going to be. All right, do we have any questions about counting your gauge and how that works?
We don't have a question about gauge, but we do have a question about what size needle you're using or what you might want to use.
Okay, so depending on what yarn you're using, you would, for socks, I would use probably a smaller needle than what it normally recommends. So this yarn that I'm using, it recommends a size 13. If you can see that, a size 13. So I made these socks on an 11, and I probably could have even gone down to a 10 and a half. You want your socks to be a little bit more tight so that they're warmer and they're knitted a little bit more densely and they don't wear out as fast. So I'm using, this is a 13 because I ran out of, I have a whole bunch of like sock pieces over here and I used up all my 11s. But for the most part, I knitted all these like sample pieces all on 11s. So, and again, that's what the gauge swatch will tell you. If you knit with an 11, a 13, or a 10, that's one thing. A gauge swatch doesn't just tell us how many stitches are in inches. It also tells us, oh, do I like this fabric? Is that too loose? So this would be too loose for a sock. So that wouldn't really work for a sock. So if this was my gauge swatch, I would be like, oh, I probably should go down to an 11 because you can see how you wouldn't really want that for a sock. So that's also what a gauge swatch will tell you, okay? So after you've counted your gauge, you want to keep a pen and piece of paper and a pencil handy and kind of write these numbers down as you get them. All right, now the next thing, now that we've got our gauge, this part gets a little confusing. It's actually very easy, but because I'm not a mathematically inclined person, I tend to make it more confusing than I need to. Plus I'm dyslexic, so I'll end up like mixing the numbers up. So for this example here, let's see where. So for this picture that I have here on the paper, this gauge swatch seems to be 14 stitches in 4 inches. So, whatever the number, my number doesn't matter. You'll just write down whatever your number was. So whatever your number of stitches were in 4 inches, that's the number you're going to be working with. What we do though, we need to figure out how many stitches are in just 1 inch. We're going to reduce it to how many stitches are in 1 inch. So we're going to divide, in this case, it would be 14, but you're going to divide your stitch count by 4 because that's how many inches I measured. And that gives me the number 3.5 stitches in 1 inch. Okay, so does that make sense? Do you want me to review that again? Does it make sense? I tend to make things very confusing when it comes to numbers. Okay, so if that's good, the measurement of the ball of my foot was 9.5 inches, and that's the measurement we're going to use here at the beginning. So back when you measured your foot, you're going to go back and check those measurements, find the measurement for the ball of your foot. Mine was 9.5 inches. So I need to figure out how many stitches equal 9.5 inches, okay? So how you're going to do that, you just multiply the number of stitches that equal 1 inch by the actual measurement you want your sock to be. Okay, so on this swatch here that I made this worksheet from, 1 stitch equals 3.5 stitches. My actual foot measurement is 9.5 inches around the ball of my foot. So that's around my foot. So what you want to do is, in this situation, you would take 3.5 stitches, multiply that by 9.5 inches, and that gives me 33.25 stitches. All right, does that make sense? You do have the handout to review when you're actually doing this, and you'll be able to rewatch this video tomorrow if you want to review these numbers. It's really very simple once you start doing it. It makes perfect sense. All right, so my stitch count now is 3.25 stitches. So 9.5 inches equals 33.25 stitches. 33.25 is my stitch count, but we're not quite done yet. So when you're making an item that you're going to be wearing, there's a term, it's called ease. So if you're making something, you want it to fit your body, but you want it to fit a certain way. So socks have what's called negative ease because they're actually smaller than your foot. You want them to be smaller because you want them to fit a little bit tight so that they don't keep sliding off as you're wearing them. Like gloves tend to be kind of tight on your hand. Hats tend to be a little bit tight on your head. They're not so loose that they'll fall off. You could make a sweater with a lot of positive ease, and it could be like a great big baggy, comfortable sweater. So the term ease just means how tight or how loose it's going to be. So for a sock, we want it to have negative ease. We want it to be tight, a little bit tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 10% negative ease. So the sock we make is going to be 10% smaller than our actual foot. So we're going to go back to our stitch count. My stitch count after I did all that crazy math was 33.25. I'm going to multiply that by 0.10, so 0.10, and that gives me 3.325. And I'm going to subtract that from my stitch count. So I'm subtracting that from my 33.25, and that gives me 29.925. That is my actual stitch count that I need. But of course, we can't have like 0.925 stitches, right? We have to just round it to the next whole number. So I round mine down to 29 because I want to make sure it's tight enough. But if you are afraid it'll be too tight, you could round it up to 30. So these are some decisions you can make as you're going along. So I round mine down to the nearest whole number, and my final stitch count is 29. Okay, does that make sense? It will make more sense when you're actually doing it. This is one of those things that in real life, it makes more sense than it does when you're talking about it. So if that makes sense, then we're ready to start knitting. And so I'm going to demonstrate a new cast on that maybe you've used, maybe you haven't used it. This it's called Judy's Magic Cast On. And this was invented, I think the lady's name is Judy Becker, and she is the one that invented it. So let me demonstrate how to do that. I'm going to move this out of the way. Now, this is another thing. It's actually quite easy, but it looks a little complicated at first. It just takes a little bit of practice. So we're going to start with a slip knot. And it's kind of like the long tail cast on. You do want to leave a bit of a tail, but we're not casting on too many stitches. So, okay. So we're going to use 2 double-pointed needles, whatever needles you decided to use to knit your sock. And we put the slip knot on the needle that's furthest away from us. We're going to hold them, and then in our other hand, you open it up like this. So it's kind of like, again, it looks like the long tail cast on. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let me show you how this looks. Okay. So this is my front needle. I'm going to call this my front needle, and this is my back needle. This is my front yarn, and this is my back yarn. So back needle, back yarn, front needle, front yarn. That's what we're working with. But what we're going to do is the front needle will always go over the back yarn and pick up the back yarn. So front needle to back yarn, pick it up, and then back needle to front yarn, pick it up. Okay. Front needle to back yarn, back needle to front yarn. And you don't want to pull these tight, but you want them to be kind of snug. Front needle to back yarn, back needle to front yarn. And then front needle to back yarn, back needle to front yarn. Okay. Do you want to see that again? It's kind of a fun thing to do, but might need to see it again. I'm trying to rush a little bit. I am pushing a little bit because there's a lot to cover and I want to make sure we try to cover everything. So it's Judy's Magic Cast On, and there are lots of videos online that review it. You start with a slip knot, just a normal slip knot. However you tie a slip knot is fine. Take 2 double-pointed needles, put the slip knot on the needle farthest away from you, and then you're going to open it up like if you were going to do the long tail cast on. And so the needle closest to you is the front yarn, or I'm sorry, the front needle, and the yarn closest to you is the front yarn. The needle in the back is the back needle and the back yarn. So just remember, front needle, it goes over the back yarn, it's picking up the back yarn. Back needle picks up the front yarn. Front needle picks up the back yarn. Back needle picks up the front yarn. Okay. Actually, it's not hard to do. It's a little bit fumbly the first time you do it, like anything is, right? But it's actually, I think you'll be able to do it really well once you practice. So how many stitches do we need to cast on? That's kind of, I think in the handout I said to cast on 6 on each needle. What that will do is, depending on how many you cast on, it's going to determine the shape of your toe. So with this one, I only cast on 3 on each needle. So it makes the toe a little bit more kind of pointy this way. If I would have cast on 6 on each needle, then the toe would have been shaped more like this. And I don't know why I cast on 3 on each needle. It was just the day and I just decided to do 3. I don't know. But, and again, depending on how much yarn or what size yarn you're using, you might want to adjust that. So if you're using sock yarn, you probably want to cast on more than 6 because the stitches are going to be very small. And that might give you like a really funny pointy shaped toe. But we're going to start our toe and we're going to see how it looks. And if we don't like it, we can easily take it out and give it another go. All right. So once we've cast on, we're going to start increasing. And this is where we're going to need that number, whichever number was your final stitch count after we took the 10% off for the 10% ease. We're going to increase until we have that many stitches. And that's going to be what we're going to work with. Okay, so we're starting at the toe and we're working up to the cuff. So this is just like normal knitting now, pretty much. So we're going to enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, and I'm going to go ahead and start with my increases. I like to do knit front and back. So I'm going to knit front and back, and then I'm going to knit across the needle. And when I get to the last stitch, I'm going to increase there. So you're always going to be increasing on just the first and the last stitch of each needle. Okay. Now a little bit of advice about this. Sometimes it's really hard, especially for beginners, to start off on the first row doing your increases. So when you're trying to do your increase on the first row, if you're having trouble getting that to work, you don't have to, you could just knit one row straight on. So you could just knit whatever stitches you have all the way around without doing the increase if you're having trouble. That's not going to make much difference. So it'll help you out. And another thing, I don't care what increase you do. I'm doing knit front and back because I like that one. You can do make one, knit front and back, any number of, but if you want to do the make one, you would have to knit one round first. So I'm on my second needle. So I'm going to knit front and back. And then I'm going to knit all the stitches. Oh, this is another thing I forgot to tell you. Okay. On the second needle, sometimes the stitches get twisted. So usually on your second needle, the stitches are going to be twisted. So for this, just this first round only, you want to knit through the back loop. If you notice that they're twisted, just go ahead and knit through the back loop to untwist them. And that's just for this one. It only happens on the first row of your back needle. Okay. And then you want to knit in the front and back of the last stitch. And it's going to look something like this. It looks like a big mess, but trust me, it will turn into a nice toe. So that's what it's going to look like. And the nice thing about this cast on, the main feature of it is for the toe of your sock, you don't get any kind of a seam or anything. So a lot of times people don't like socks because you don't want your toe to feel that seam. And if you look here on this one I made, the stitches continue all the way around that toe without any kind of a seam or any kind of a ridge. And so that makes things very comfortable in the sock. All right, any questions about this up to the first round? Do you want me to do it again, or should we move on to the next thing?
We did have a question about what sort of needles. Do you have to start it on DPNs or could you use other needles? Sorry.
I'm going to say you have to start it on the needles that you're going to be using to knit in the round. And if you're going to knit in the round using magic loop as the method, then that's the needles you'll use to cast on. If you're going to use it double points, I would use those to cast on. If you cast on with straight needles that have a stopper on the end, you're going to have to transfer those stitches immediately onto double points anyway. So I don't know. I mean, if that's what you want to do, you certainly can, but it's going to just be an extra step that's not necessarily needed. So, I mean, you can try. I always say try it. If you have an idea and you think something's going to work and you'll like it better, I think you should try it and see. So I'm going to knit one more round on this one just to demonstrate if there are no more questions.
We did have a question about how to get from the cast on to the first round.
First round.
And then while you're unraveling that, do you always have to cast on an even number of stitches?
No, you don't have to. You can cast on really whatever you want. It's nice if it's an even number because it kind of keeps things equal on both sides. I would certainly want them to be as even as possible. If you ended up with like 9 stitches on one side and 8 on the other, it wouldn't be such a bad thing. But I would recommend when you start out to try to make an even number. I think that's a good way to start. So start with a slip knot, put that on your back needle. Hold it like you're going to start magic loop. The front needle picks up the back needle picks up.
Hold it like you're going to start long tail.
Yep. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's like, Darren, you hate magic loop.
I hate magic loop. I know, right? Okay, let me start over. So put it on. Hold it like you're going to start the long tail cast on. The front needle, because the slip knot's on the back needle, we pick up on the front needle first. So the front needle picks up the back needle picks up the front. The front needle picks up the back needle picks up the front. And you just continue on like that until you get as many stitches as you want. And I do about anywhere from 3 to 6. You don't want to do too many of them. And because we picked the, I like to end with the back needle. And sometimes that gives me an extra stitch on the back needle. Because if you don't, then this stitch, see how this stitch here isn't really, because I just picked up a loop, it's not really attached to anything. See right there. See, I just put that over my needle. It's not really attached to anything. So if I pick up one on the back needle, it kind of locks that stitch into place. And you'll see what I mean when you start doing it. It's kind of hard to see on a video. If we were in person.
Does it matter which end of which, how do I phrase this? Does it matter which hand you hold the working yarn in?
I don't think
Like if
so.
okay.
If you're going to knit continental or knit the British method, I think it works either way. Wouldn't you think, Claire?
Yes, I know for some cast-ons you need to have like your tail on your thumb and your working yarn in the back, or vice versa. But for this, I don't think it matters.
Yep, I think it'll be okay. So here's my cast on. And so I'm going to start my first round. And you just start it. And if you're having a hard time starting your increase here, you can knit just all of the stitches just one time around without increasing and start increasing on the next round. And that'll just give you like a little nub on the end of your toe, but it's not going to make much difference by the time you wear it. So I'm going to do my increase, knit front and back. And then just knit normal without increasing until you get to the last stitch, and then knit front and back on the last stitch. So you're increasing 2 stitches, one on each end, on each pass. So now I'm on the back needle, and this is the one where they usually end up twisted, so you'd want to knit through the back loop, and that will untwist them, and that's only for the first round. I'm going to do my increase on my last one. So I've increased 2 stitches on each needle to make a total of 4 stitches increase. And then you just want to count all of your stitches and make sure you're not getting up past your stitch count. All right, I'll just do the second one. So just do an increase on the first one, knit all the way across, doing no increases. And then you do the next increase on the very last one of that row. And then on the back one, you do the same. And then it looks like this. See that magic of television? So let me show you what I did here. I have my stitch count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have 13 on this one. And then this is going to be the bottom of my foot. So right now you're going to make a decision. What is going to be the top of your foot and what is going to be the bottom of your foot. So this is going to be the bottom of my foot. And then I divide the stitches that are going to be on the top of my foot onto 2 needles like this. So I can knit in the round and make a triangle. And you do want these to be even. So if you have an odd stitch, put it on the bottom, because you want to keep these even amount, because it's going to help keep track of things later. So if you're working with like 31 stitches, put that extra stitch on the bottom of the foot and keep the top 2 even. Okay, keep things a little bit better for you in the long run. So this is what the toe is going to look like. This is the finished toe, and we're ready to start knitting the foot. Okay, and once we reach this point, you're just going to knit in the round just like normal. You're just going to keep knitting in the round, just like you always do when you're knitting in the round. And you're going to keep going until you reach the measurement that you took of how long your foot is. Not your entire
Heidi
foot.
has a Heidi has a question on the increase rows, or rounds technically. Are we increasing every round or every other round?
I do it, I'm going to say every round. That's what I did on that one. Did I? And again, that could depend on what size yarn you're using. You might want to see how it looks. If you're using really small sock yarn, you might want to adjust that. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, I would say for thinner yarn, you're going to want to do every other round, and that will give you the added length for the toe. But with such chunky yarn, your stitches are so tall that you might as well increase every round.
Yeah, and that's one thing about the toe up is you can try it on your foot as you go. And if you're increasing every round or every other round and you try it on and it's not fitting your foot correctly, you can rip it out and fix that. Just go ahead and adjust that before you get going. Okay.
And you wouldn't have to do the same thing for the whole toe because you could increase every round to begin with, and that would give you more of a curved toe, and then switch to every other round to get the length if you needed.
Yeah, lots of these things are going to be fun to play with and experiment with as you go. So that's the one thing I like. I don't like to be told exactly what to do. I like to kind of do it on my own. All right, so I wanted to show you the measurement. So you want to knit, once you're knitting your toe, you want to knit until it is from the beginning of your toe to where it joins your leg. So just this bit right here. And now we're going to have to increase to make the gusset. So it's going to look just like this. And now we're going to do increases to make a gusset. Now a gusset, if you don't know what a gusset is it's usually a triangular piece of fabric. And you can use this when you're sewing or when you're knitting, but when you're creating extra space around, usually for a curve or when something gets larger, it can give you a little bit of extra added room and help with shaping of a garment. So you can see right here, this little triangular shaped area is the gusset. Can you see that triangular shape there? So that's what we're going to be making. And that helps to change our sock from like a tube sock, like you wouldn't want a tube sock. That's going to help create, it's going to prepare us to make the heel, okay? So for the gusset, you might want to use some stitch markers to help keep track of where you are in the gusset. You can put a, unknit this so I can get to where I need to be to demonstrate this for you. Hold on one second. Just because this is your first time, you might want to use stitch markers to help you keep track. So you're going to do your increases. The increases are going to be I drew this little drawing to help demonstrate it. So what we're looking at, so this is what we're looking at. This is the bottom of our foot, and this is going to create the top of our foot. So we're looking at this triangular shape. And so that's what I've drawn here. This is supposed to represent your knitting in a triangular shape. The bottom of the foot, the stitches are not going to change. So with this little drawing, there are 15 stitches on the bottom. That number will not change. Always have 15 stitches on the bottom, or whatever your count is. Whatever your stitch count is, that number will not change. What is going to change is the top of the foot. So on this needle and on this needle, we're going to be adding a stitch. And where we're going to add that stitch is the very first stitch on this needle right here. And then we're going to knit across, come to this needle, knit across, and we're going to increase at the very last stitch on this one. So we're going to increase 2 stitches, and we're going to do that every other round. So this time we are going to do it every other round. So the bottom stays straight. We don't do anything to the bottom. We just knit across, maintaining the same stitch count. And then we're going to start on the top. We're going to increase 1 at the very beginning. And that, I was going to say, you might want to put a stitch marker there. So you put a stitch marker there to help you remember. Go all the way up, all the way back down until we get to the last stitch. You can put a stitch marker there to help you remember, and we're going to increase on the last one. And we're going to do that every other round. Let me show you how that looks in real life. Okay, so put my stitch marker around my needle so I can keep it there. And when I get to that stitch marker, I'm going to remember, haha, I have to do something, right? So that first stitch, I'm going to do a knit front and back. Now you can do whatever you want. You can do a make one. You can do any increase you like that's going to increase it by 1. I'll show you why I like the increase front and back later on. Slip your marker and then knit all the way across, not increasing. So this is really pretty easy. And then knit the other top piece of your sock. Yeah, I'm using needles that are different sizes because I ran out of all my like 11s. So I have to use like other sizes because I have all these like little samples with needles on them. Okay, but I was talking and I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Right, I almost made a big mistake. So when you get to the last one, go ahead and put your stitch marker on there, and that will help you remember you need to increase. So I'm going to do my increase there, and if you're talking and not paying attention, you might miss it, so be careful, don't do what I did. And now we've added 1 stitch all across the top. And just because you don't want to waste your life watching me knit, you would go across the bottom, across the top, and do just even number of stitches, no increases. And then the next round, you come across the bottom. The very first stitch, you do your increase. So you might want to move this. You might not want to move it every time, but just remember, it's always the first stitch. So if you have to move this every time so that you remember, you can move it every time, or you might not need to if you just remember to do it on the very first stitch, because it's always going to kind of move back 1 every time we increase. So any questions about how to do that? And I can show you what that looks like. And I have it finished on this one. Let me take this out of here. And because I'm knitting such a small little sock here, it doesn't show up as much. But what we're looking at is, this is the gusset right here. So you see how the foot is shaped, it's kind of going straight, and then it creates this, it increases right there. So that's what we're increasing to. And the reason I like to do knit front and back is because it creates this little tattletale. It creates this little bump that looks like a purl bump. And if you're not paying attention, or if you put this down and come back later, you might forget, oh, did I increase the last round, or is this an increase round? I can't remember. But what you can do is you can go back and find these little bumps. And if the little bump, like this one right here, is bumped clear up against the needle, that means I did my increase on the last round. The last time I did my pass, I did an increase. So if I were going to come again, it would be a non-increase round. So that kind of helps me keep track of where I am in my knitting. But if you're really good at remembering and keeping track, then if you do a make one, then these are pretty much invisible and you really don't see anything. So you can make a decision on what you would rather do. I like people to be able to be empowered to make these decisions as you go. All right, any questions about the gusset?
Yes, question. How did you know how many increases to do?
Oh, I forgot to tell you that. Trying to hurry to get through this. So what you're going to do, let me see if I have another drawing. What you're going to do, and this is all, it's all spelled out in the handout. So I have 15 stitches here. I have 7 and I have 7 on this side. And that's how I started before my increases. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep doing my increases until I double the number of stitches I have on each of the top needles. So I'm going to keep going until I have 14 stitches here, 14 stitches here, and then the bottom will not change. It will always remain whatever you start with. And in this case, it'll be 15. So you're going to work on your gusset until the top number of stitches doubles. And that just depends on how many stitches you're starting with. So that number changes, of course, if you're using sock weight yarn or worsted weight or super bulky. So you're going to double this number on the top. Does that make any questions about that? Thank you for asking that because that's important.
Yes, I wanted to make sure we got that information in there.
I've made so many socks like this. It just, see, I just skip over stuff sometimes because I've done it so many times. Any other questions up to this point? So what we've done, we did our Judy's Magic cast on for the toe. We knit the foot, keeping the same, whatever our stitch count was. We did our increases here, and then we knit our foot, and then we knit our gusset. So we're up to the gusset. And now that we've reached the right number of stitches, we're ready to make the heel flap. And what that is, or not the heel flap, the heel turn. So this is going to help us to turn our heel to make the sock shaped in a certain way. And so the next thing we're going to be knitting is just this little kind of round or triangular piece on the bottom. All right, so we're going to be just knitting that one little thing. So that's really easy. So now at this point in the game, we're not going to be knitting in the round for just a little bit. We're only going to be knitting on the bottom of these stitches. Okay. And I should have, I would have liked to have stopped on the purl on the knit side. I'm going to take out a few stitches because I want to start this off right here. Let me get back to where I needed to be. So you just knit across this. Everything seems normal at the start. Everything's going fine. You're just knitting like normal. And when you get back to the last 2 stitches, you're going to do something a little bit unusual here. And this is called a short row. And maybe you've heard of short rows, and maybe you've been afraid of short rows because a lot of people think they're really hard. But once you do them, they're not hard, I promise. If they were hard, I wouldn't do it. So this is called the wrap and turn. So I'm going to take my right hand needle and I'm going to slip I'm going to slip this stitch over. So you want to make sure you're not twisting it. So you enter the stitch as if to purl and you slip it over. And then you take your working yarn and you bring it towards you. You slip that stitch back over. And now I need to purl back. So I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to purl back. So to purl, I need to bring my yarn to the front. And so let me see if I can show you this without losing all my stitches. what happens is that yarn that I took to the front and then moved to the back, and if you can see that, it ends up wrapping around that stitch. So there's my stitch, and then I end up wrapping the yarn all the way around it. And that's why it's called wrap and turn, because I wrap it around it and then I turn it. And then you knit across. I'm purling across. And with big yarn like this, you don't have enough stitches to do very many of these. So I might actually go all the way across and wrap and turn that one as well as this one. But for now, we're just going to do it this way. So you enter the stitch as if to purl because you don't want to twist it. You slip it over, put your yarn to the front, and this is helping to create our wrap. Turn your work, slip that stitch back over without working it and without twisting it. And then you're going to wrap, because I have to do the knit stitch. I have to put my yarn in the back to do my knit stitch. And that creates this right here. That yarn is wrapped around that stitch like a little collar, a little scarf. And then you knit across. And I'm going to do every stitch just so that I can demonstrate this for you. So you enter. Turn. Position your yarn to do the purl. Do your purl. Sorry. Slip. Wrap. Turn. Slip it back. And then I have one stitch left in the middle. Now, do you want to see that again? Because that kind of gets kind of confusing, right? Do we want to see it again, the wrap and turn?
If you
Or
can do it fast, we've got about 15 minutes left.
I'm going to do it on this swatch right here. Okay, so I'm just going to knit, and this is just a practice one, so I'm not in the round. Okay, so I'm going to do my short row right here. You slip it over without twisting it, bring your yarn to the front, slip it back, turn your work, and then bring the yarn in the front again because you need to have it there to purl. Knit until it comes to the next one you need to do. Okay, I'm going to do it right here. You slip that stitch over, wrap the yarn around it, turn your work, slip it back over, and I'll need to put my yarn in the right place to do my knit stitch, and that's what creates the wrap because we're wrapping it all the way around. Okay, and this is called the wrap and turn. And the reason we have to wrap it like that is because if we just stop in the middle of a row and go back without doing anything special, it'll create a hole in your sock. So you don't really want to start off life with a hole in your sock. So, and now here's how we're going to finish these wrap and turns. Let's see if I can make sure I get this here where you can see it. So this stitch here is just a normal stitch. It looks just normal. So I'm just going to knit that like normal. Now this one looks different, right? Because we did the wrap and turn there. And there's probably a real elegant way to do this, some real clever way, but I don't really know it. So what I do is I slip that stitch over, and now I'm going to pick up this wrap, and I'm going to put this stitch back over. So now I've got two there, and I just knit them together. There's probably some elegant way to just pick them both up at the same time or something. To slip that stitch over, pick up your wrap, put that on. I'll show you that again. So this is how you start. slip that stitch over, pick up your wrap, put both of them on your left-hand needle, and then knit them together. And then the last one doesn't have anything. Now I'm going to pick up the ones on the other side, the purl side. So I'm going to work halfway across, just purling just like normal because I already picked up those wraps. And if you want to, it makes it a little easier. Whenever you do a wrap and turn, if you put a stitch marker on the wrap as you make them, then it makes it really easy when you come back across to find them, to pick them up. So I'm going to slip this stitch over, pick up my wrap, put my stitch there, and now purl them together. Oops. So you could put a stitch marker there to kind of keep track of them. I'm going to slip this stitch over, pick up my wrap, put them both there, and then, oops, then purl them together. And then just purl my last one. My stitches were kind of loose here, but that's, you get the idea. That's what it will look like. And let me show you on this one. So this is what you end up looking like. You have this little triangular shape that gives you room to the bottom of your foot. Now we're still going to be knitting flat for just a little bit. And so we're going to knit then across, knit back across your foot just like normal. So I've got something to show you here. So on this sample, I thought I picked up my wraps and I was ready to start, but I didn't. So I want to show you what happens if you don't pick up your wraps. So that was a little accident I made, but it's kind of handy because now I can show you. So you can see it kind of creates this hole, and you really wouldn't want holes like that in your knitting. So make sure you pick up your wraps. I'm going to proceed just so that we can keep going. All right, so when you get to, this is what it was looking like. So when I get to the last stitch on that needle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide it on to one of my top needles. Okay. And then I'm going to knit those two together. So I'm going to knit this one together with this one. And then I'm going to turn and I'm going to purl back. And so let me finish this row and then I'll explain what I'm doing. I'll show you how to do it. This is creating what's called a heel flap. And this one is creating the fabric that will be covering the back of your foot. So we just created the fabric for the bottom of the foot. Now we're creating the fabric for the back of the foot. Okay, so knit that stitch. Now that I have one stitch left, what I'm going to do is I'm going to join that. I'm going to put it on that needle, and I'm going to purl those two together. And so what's happening is I'm losing one stitch off of my top every time I go back across. So I'm going to work back across and I'm going to knit this stitch here, the last stitch on my bottom foot, to the first stitch on my top foot. I'm going to do that every time. And what that creates is, so what that's going to create is this part of the sock. So this was the bottom. This is called the heel turn. This creates room for the bottom of our foot. And now we're creating the back of the foot. So when we come across, we're knitting one stitch from the bottom of the heel here to one stitch of the gusset. And then we go all the way back across and we do the same on this side. And we're going to keep going up. We're not working in the round, you're still working flat. And you're going to keep going until you go back to the same number of stitches you started with. So when we made the gusset, we doubled the number of stitches we had on the top of our foot. And so now we're going to continue making this heel flap using one stitch from each side of the top. And we're going to continue that until we're back to the original stitch count. So that's what's going to create the back of the foot. And then once we get up here, we're back to the original stitch count that we started with here. And then we're ready to start knitting the leg. Now I'll demonstrate that again. Does that make any sense, or does that just sound all crazy? It sounded a little crazy when I was telling it, so I don't know how you heard it. So we're going to knit across the bottom of the foot. Until we have one stitch left. And I'm going to put that here. And I'm going to take that stitch is from the bottom of my needle, my bottom needle, and I'm going to knit that together with the stitch on the top half of my foot. And so what happens is I'm losing one stitch from the top every time I do this. Turn my work and I have to purl back. You just want to remember to work in stockinette stitch, so making sure you have your knits on one side and your purls on the other. And once you get, if you want to try this sock and you get comfortable making it, there are lots of fun, interesting variations on heels and toes and gussets that you can explore. But this will just kind of get you through the door of making socks, because a lot of times people think it's really going to be a hard, scary, difficult thing. Okay. One stitch left. I'm going to put that on this needle, which is holding the stitches for the top of my foot. Try not to drop one. And then I'm going to purl those together. And so what happens is I lose one stitch from the other side of the top of my foot, and the bottom stitch count should always stay the same. Okay? Any questions about that?
I was going to say we're about 2 minutes from 5 o'clock here on the East Coast, 4 o'clock Central. I wanted to make sure that you at least talked about the bind off real quickly before people might have to go. But I also want to remind you that the recording for this class will be available tomorrow at michaels.com/classes. And I'm going to pop both the PDF and the Word versions of the handout in the chat again as well.
All right, so once you have finished knitting the area for the back of the foot and your stitch count is back to your original number that you increased to. So you started with a toe, you increased to your stitch count here, knitted even across, made your gusset, did your heel turn, you knitted your heel flap, and so you're using a stitch from each side of the top to make the heel flap. And now you're back to your original stitch count, okay? So all you're gonna do now, it's very easy, is you're just gonna knit the leg. Now here's where, like if you have really small ankles or larger ankles or something, you might wanna increase or decrease to accommodate how your foot or your leg is shaped. If you wanna have a sock that goes clear up over the calf, you might wanna do a little increasing if you have a large calf. So you can just kind of, take measurements of your leg and, accommodate as needed with increasing or decreasing stitches. And once you make it as long as you want, you do want to finish off with ribbing. And I like knit 2 purl 2 ribbing. It's a classic. You can do knit 1 purl 1. You can do whatever you want. You can live your life how you choose to live it. But just do enough ribbing that it's not going to roll down. You don't want it to roll. And ribbing is kind of an elastic feature, so it'll kind of hold your sock in place. So they always have ribbing at the top, right? So you can choose how long. You can stop your sock right here and just have like little footy house slippers, or you can make a leg. You can make thigh highs if you want to. Um, so let me demonstrate that. You need to have a stretchy bind off. That's the key, because you don't want, if the bind off is very stiff, then you won't be able to pull it up over your leg and your foot. It'll be very difficult to work with. So you could bind off in pattern with a larger needle, and that helps to give us a stretchy bind off. Or you can do Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. Clara, was Jenny a real person, or do you know who Jenny was?
Yes, she is a real person. I don't remember her name right off the top of my head.
Okay. So I'm going to just do a normal bind off just to show you what the normal one is. So you bind off with 2 stitches. So knit a stitch, you take that stitch and jump over it. So for Jenny's surprisingly stretchy one, after you do your bind off, you do a backwards yarn over, knit the stitch, and then you bring the backwards yarn over, and then you bring, whoops, that first stitch over. And now I have 1 stitch remaining. You do a backwards yarn over, knit your next stitch, and then you pass your yarn over, leapfrogs over your stitch, and then your first stitch leapfrogs over that, 1 stitch. Let me try it right here where you can see. Backwards yarn over. So normally when you do a yarn over, you would go that way, but you wrap your needle the wrong, you don't get to wrap your needle the wrong way very often. So it's kind of a rare treat. So wrap the needle the wrong way, enter the stitch, wrap the needle the right way, finish your stitch, and then the yarn over passes over, and then your stitch passes over. And it is surprisingly very stretchy. Like the first time I did this, I thought, what is this mess? And it is surprisingly, you can see there, it's actually surprisingly very stretchy. It can sometimes kind of splay out a little bit. So I wouldn't do this on a bigger needle. I would do this on the same size needle that you're knitting with. And Claire, do you do this one loose, or do you just do it normal? Because have you ever had it kind of splay out a little bit?
I know it can splay out a little bit, so I would just do it normal and, like you said, with the same size needle.
Yeah.
It's Jenny with a J, and I think only 1 N.
If you Google Jenny surprisingly stretchy bind off, it'll come up because she's pretty famous. And that's the end of it. So that's really, and if you use super bulky yarn like this, you should be able to work these socks up pretty quick. And if your first pair doesn't turn out quite right, your second pair will be much better. And just keep practicing. That's why I like to teach with a super bulky yarn, because you can have a finished sock pretty quick. And especially if you're not doing a leg, if you're just going to stop once you come up to the top of the heel flap, you're going to do a little ribbing and bind off there. You can make these really fast. They make great gifts. Holiday season's coming up, and they work up pretty fast. And if you give people handmade socks for Christmas, you're going to win Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you celebrate. You'll win. You'll win first prize. So, all right. So any quick questions? Remember, you can watch the video tomorrow. If you do have any questions, you can find me on Instagram. And my Instagram is Mr. Woolly Bear. It's Mister, and then Woolly Bear. Maybe Claire will put that in the comments for you. And I actually have a few videos on there of, I think I have I have the Jenny's jute, I have the magic cast on and something else. But you can send me a direct message if you have questions, and I usually can answer them pretty quick. So just in case, we went through this all really fast. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. All right, anything else?
I just wanted to remind everybody again about the recording. It'll be at michaels.com/classes tomorrow. And we've got some other classes coming up in November. Next Monday, we're going to be covering steeking, how to chop up your knitting.
Very exciting.
Yes. And then if you accidentally put a hole in your knitting, November 16th will cover how to repair hand knits. So you can do both.
Yep, you can cut them up and then fix them.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Okay, goodbye.